Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Fergal Armstrong, and welcome to this episode of Cracking Addiction. And once again, we have with us the good Dr. Laura Petracek. Hello, Laura. How are you?
I'm good, Fergal. How about yourself?
I'm very well. So I thought today we'd continue our journey in the non-crisis emotional regulation management skills and really focusing today on mindfulness. So, what is mindfulness?
Well, mindfulness is paying attention to the moment. Mindfulness is being in the here and now. And there are many mindfulness exercises to get to that point, to stay in the moment and
Hmm.
live in this moment instead of regretting yesterday or worrying about tomorrow.
Why does it work?
Why does it work? Well, some of the research says that mindfulness works because by learning to train our minds to be in the current moment and not regretting yesterday or having anxiety or worry about tomorrow, those physiological responses are lessened. So our
Hmm.
heart rate is lower. Our breathing is more, we're breathing from our belly, whereas when we're anxious, we're shallow breathing. Um, it's also calming. Our mind is not racing as much when we're in the present moment. Like,
Hmm.
oh, okay, I didn't do that, or oh, I should have done that, or oh, what about tomorrow, or
Hmm.
so it's a way. So that's why it, quote, works in terms of lowering physiological responses, thereby a lot of times lowering reactive responses and being
Hmm.
able to face situations and ourselves in a calmer manner.
So, in the context of helping people with the management of emotional dysregulation, it's one of those skills which has to be worked on over time, but it allows you to focus on one particular thing and exclude all of the worry that might be surrounding you. Am I hearing that right?
Yes. And in fact, so one of the skills or tools is pay attention, like pay
Mm.
attention to this moment right now,
Mm.
what's happening. Um, Slow down, use all
Yeah.
your senses to take in the moment
Yeah.
or live in the moment. Try to intentionally accept and discern your attention to everything you do. Find
Yeah. I
joy,
suppose.
pleasures, like doing dishes, for example.
I love doing dishes.
Yes,
Not.
not. It's funny. My partner, she loved just a few days ago. She's like, I really like doing dishes, and I noticed that she's like happy doing them. I do not like
Really.
it, but it's funny. She likes it.
Yeah. I mean, that's yeah. For me, the how I conceptualize mindfulness, there are lots of ways of thinking about it, but one of the ways that I think about it is that basically you are you are using one of your attention functions, vigilance, and you are trying to focus your vigilance on one thing, and the brain cannot think of more than one thing. Only 5% of human beings can truly multitask. Whereas the lesser mortals of this earth, the other 95%, can only think of one thing at one time. And if you are vigilant on one particular topic or idea or activity, then that excludes you from thinking about absolutely everything else. And so the ability to use your focus like a light and focus it on one particular thing is a skill that requires a neurological substrate, a part of the brain that's just like a muscle. And so we know that when people practice this skill, when people practice mindfulness, parts of the brain actually get bigger, and the connections between the brain gets bigger. So it's not wishy-washy. It's hard neuroscience that underpins the theory about mindfulness. Um, The other thing I want to talk to you about regarding mindfulness is that the word meditation has been used with mindfulness frequently. Do you think that mindfulness is a form of meditation?
Well, I do think it is. I mean, they're actually usually separated into two separate categories, mindfulness and meditation. So they're
Mm,
not necessarily one and the same, but I think
mm,
there's some overlap.
mm,
Um, like in terms of focusing on your breathing, that's more in
mm,
the mindfulness category. But then in the meditation category, like body scan meditation or sitting meditation, that also includes breathing. So that's why I think there is some overlap, but there's definitely separateness as well. Like attending to
mm.
one thing in the moment, to me, that's more mindfulness. You know,
Yeah,
you're just right here, right now, and this is what you're doing.
yeah.
Um,
When I think about meditation, I think that there's the kind of empty your mind kind of meditation where you're trying to focus on one thing to the exclusion of all else to empty the mind, and that's more kind of the traditional Eastern meditation techniques.
right,
Whereas mindfulness, I think, is part of that tradition or the discipline of discursive meditation, where you are focusing on one thing, not really to exclude everything else, even though that is the effect,
right.
but you're focusing on a particular activity or a particular train of thought. And that's very much consistent with the types of meditation that are done in Western Celtic traditions, whereby you take an idea and you focus on the idea, and then you expand it to the next idea in the same chain, and then you keep going. And if your mind wanders away from that idea or that chain of ideas, then you push your mind back to that. So again, it's determining that you need to focus on that particular one thing. So I think it's slightly different. People, the word meditation is used in many, many situations, and I think it's important to understand what kind of meditation it is, because there are different types. So, for instance, following that train of thought in the same camp as being mindful about what you're doing. So, instead of doing the dishes and thinking about what am I going to cook for dinner tonight, I'm doing the dishes and I'm thinking, okay, so putting the plate in the water and I'm scrubbing the plate and I'm putting it into the rack and I'm going to dry it. So again, that's focusing on that train of thought. So it's focusing on some positive content rather than trying to empty the mind. But I suppose they both techniques do require this mental effort and does produce changes in the brain that can be seen either functionally or on structural scans.
Yeah. I really like your explanation of the differences between mindfulness and meditation, that mindfulness is focusing on one thing, but not necessarily to the exclusion of all else, whereas meditation is focusing on one thing to the exclusion of all else. I think that's a good, separation or definition of the two. And I agree with you. I think that mindfulness is about,
I think I
oh,
don't think I've explained it right, if that's how you think. So for me, it's all about how mindfulness is focusing on, well, I mean, let's use the terminology, the present. So it's
yes,
focusing on something. It's trying to celebrate the existence of something, whereas Eastern meditation is trying to empty the mind. So it's trying to keep the mind blank versus trying to keep the mind full of one thing.
right.
Does
Okay.
that make sense? That's
Yeah.
that's how I conceptualize it.
hmm Well, I find so most clients, and myself included, find it really hard to have an empty mind,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
we're always thinking. I mean, when we're
yeah.
awake, human beings are constantly thinking. So instead of trying to reach that lofty goal, I suggest to clients, and this is what helped me, just choose one word, to come back to when you're focusing on your meditating and breathing. So it is very difficult for people to not think about anything because physiologically, our brains are meant to think, and that's what they do
Mm.
24,
Mm.
except when we're asleep. So instead, I suggest to them to focus on one word and then to come back to that word when they find their mind going off thinking about something else.
Exactly. It's the focusing on one positive thing rather than trying to keep empty.
Yes.
So mindfulness is not just being in the present. It's also there are also ideas of non-judgmental interest. Let's talk about that.
Yes. So mindfulness is also being aware,
Mm.
or gaining awareness. So when we find we're being judgmental, like just to stop and say that to yourself, judgmental, when you gain
Yeah.
that awareness. Because if we're judging someone else, more than likely we're also judging ourselves, which we do. But we're even
Mm.
in that trap more so if we're not gaining awareness. So the
Yes.
more we're aware of we're judging someone else and stopping it, the less likely we're going to be judging ourselves and being so harsh on ourselves.
Someone once said, and I wish I could recall the author's name, but judgment without mercy, either of ourselves or others, is the root cause of all unnecessary suffering.
Mm, I think
So is
that's,
that part of mindfulness as well? Non-judgmentalism?
yes, most definitely.
Mm.
And it's
Yeah.
also, like you said, it's that going back to my phrase or the phrase, pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. It speaks to that exactly. If
Mm.
we're not judging, we're not suffering needlessly.
Yeah. Yeah. So who invented mindfulness?
Well, so Dr. Linehan borrowed from a lot of traditions for mindfulness. She uses, a lot of Eastern traditions, like you were talking about, John Kabat-Zinn, Tara Brach, are the more modern ones, but also Eastern tradition. She even uses Catholic mysticism. So the mindfulness part of DBT isn't her baby, isn't her invention. She borrowed heavily from all the other existing mindfulness traditions.
And I suppose this goes back to my previous point that I made in another episode that the ecosystem of psychological medicine is a very harsh one, and it really is survival of the fittest. And these techniques do not survive unless they work. So the fact that mindfulness has been borrowed and assumed into DBT means that there is some, on a very basic level, that's proof in and of itself that it is actually a valid therapy that is able to help people with various emotional and mental health problems.
Yes, you're exactly right. The fact that it's borrowed
Yeah.
and also been studied and researched, done a lot of research. Um, like John's about Zen, mindfulness based stress reduction, 8-week courses have been heavily studied, and the mindfulness um, really helps with people in terms of the level of their pain, level of their acceptance,
Hmm.
level of their uh, reality, accepting reality in their life, whatever the situation. Um,
Yeah. Okay. So mindfulness and mindfulness is one of those tools that allows us to emotionally regulate over the long term, but it's not, it acts as the foundation upon which we can build our crisis intervention tools. Although it, in and of itself, is not a crisis intervention tool. That's what you're saying.
right. In and of itself, mindfulness isn't a crisis intervention tool. However, that's a good point about it's built over time because sometimes there's confusion with my own clients in the sense of they do like these power meditations on the weekend but they don't meditate during the week. They'll do like an hour on Saturday and Sunday. And mindfulness is built on a daily basis, meaning the research has shown that if you meditate 15 minutes a day, you're going to get more benefit from that than meditating an hour on Saturday, an hour on Sunday, and nothing during the week. So I really try to impress this upon my clients that practicing mindfulness every day, even only for 10 minutes, you're going to be building a stronger foundation than if you have this weekend warrior type of meditation.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's no role for the weekend warrior in meditation.
No.
It's got to be an everyday thing, which is really, really hard to do. I don't know if you do it every day. I certainly don't live up to my own
Yeah.
standards.
I mean, I've had periods in my life where I did do it every day, and now it's hit
Yeah,
and miss. But I know it sets the tone for a better day when I do. That much I know for sure.
yeah. All right. Well, look, sadly, we've come to an end once again. I want to thank you for your expertise, Laura.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Fergal. It's always wonderful to be here.
So that's all for today, folks. My name is Dr. Fergal Armstrong, and this has been Cracking Addiction.